Oftentimes, after a person has completed some training in motivational interviewing, they find themselves a bit overwhelmed by all the terminology that they've just learned. Maybe you're at a point where you've learned words like ambivalence, the writing reflex, change talk, sustain talk. Maybe you've even learned different types of change talk. We generally categorize those as desire, ability, reason, need, commitment, activation, and taking steps. Probably you've learned the four elements of the spirit of motivational interviewing as partnership, acceptance, compassion, evocation. You've likely practiced a lot of the basic, what we call micro skills of motivational interviewing. Those fall under the acronym OARS, open-ended questions, affirmations, reflections, and summaries. Maybe you've even learned more than that in motivational interviewing. My point is, you might be at the point at which this is all kind of swirling around your head. And when it comes time to practice, it can be really overwhelming to know where in the world to begin. And with that in mind, I want to introduce you to what we call the four processes. Now, this is not meant to be additional lingo for you to learn and have swarming around your head. This is meant to be a way of organizing some of the concepts you've already learned. So I'd like you to think about this as an organizing system where you take everything you've already learned and start to put it together in something that might make sense for you. So let's see what that could look like. This is a model of the four processes, and before I begin to walk through it, I just want to say this is meant to be loosely held. This is not meant to be like a step-by-step program for how you begin and end an interaction in a motivational interviewing style. Certainly not in any strict way, anyway. It is meant to be some guidance about how you might begin your conversation, where you might take it next, and where you might end your interaction with a person with whom you're working. With that in mind, I encourage you to look at that top arrow on the screen, the blue one that goes all the way across, and that says engaging. The idea here is that you would begin all the way on the left-hand side of the screen, maybe just getting to know someone, building a relationship with him or her. Perhaps at this point, you are just meeting someone and helping them feel comfortable, maybe for yourself, getting a sense of how comfortable they may be. Here, your only job is to use the spirit of motivational interviewing and perhaps some of the skills of motivational interviewing to just build that foundational relationship. This is pretty important before you dive into the work. I can't imagine any of you would do this, but just hypothetically, try to imagine sitting down with a client where you work and just jumping right into questions like, why would you want to make this change? And what are your strategies? And what are your plans? And could I give you some suggestions? And all of those things that you've been learning are wonderful. However, they are no way to begin. And so here in the model you see, it says maintain the spirit and use the skills, but additionally, be making this attempt to build a trusting relationship. See if you can assess the client's comfort and confidence and readiness to engage with you. This is a very good opportunity to tease out and try to get a sense of any discord there may be, because it's going to be very difficult for you to move forward in this conversation if your relationship isn't strong first. At some point, you might feel like you have a good sense of this person's comfort level and perhaps maybe they're ready to begin doing some of the quote work of motivational interviewing. And if that's true, you might continue along in this model. You do not stop engaging at any point. You see that blue arrow goes all the way across the screen, but you might pick up and add in that green arrow that says focusing. At this point, you are doing two things, engaging and focusing. So you have two goals. Continue that strong relationship that you've already started. And now with focusing, you're trying to determine what is it that we are here to talk about. This, in my view, is an opportunity to really carve out a target behavior. And if you've come to a training of mine, you may have heard me make this distinction before between behaviors and outcomes of behaviors. So for example, if someone says to you, my goal is to lose 100 pounds, that may be wonderful for them, and perhaps they will lose 100 pounds, but that is a hopeful outcome of some behaviors, things like potentially exercising more, or maybe changing the way he or she is eating. Those are behaviors that can be focused upon. But losing 100 pounds is the hopeful outcome of those behaviors. Here, in this part of the model where we are engaging and focusing, I'm asking you to really try to get specific about what is the behavior this person hopes to speak about and explore and resolve their ambivalence about. At some point, you may decide, okay, we know what it is we are here to talk about now. We have a focus. You will continue engaging all the way across the model here, and you continue focusing. You don't get to a point where you say, I know what it is we're talking about, and I will not be focusing anymore. Focusing, just like engaging, is a constant process of reevaluation. You will constantly be circling back to make sure, are we still talking about the thing that we imagined we would be talking about? Is that appropriate? Have we stuck to this focus and maybe we shouldn't have? Is it time to refocus? And you will be constantly negotiating that with the client and with your gut instincts as well. And so focusing does not end. You see the blue arrow of engaging goes all the way across the screen. And once you begin focusing, that green arrow of focusing also goes all the way across the screen. At some point, you may pick up the additional task of evoking. Now this has a little star next to it, you see, in the gray arrow. Evoking is when motivational interviewing becomes motivational interviewing. Very often people attend a one-day introductory workshop, and probably, depending on who gave your workshop, probably most things you learned in that introductory workshop would fall under this category of evoking. I will guess that you learned about using open-ended questions and affirmations and reflections and summaries to hopefully evoke this change talk argument for making a change. That is exactly what we're talking about doing in this process of evoking. There is, however, or I should say are, however, two processes ahead of it, engaging and focusing. The point here is that all of those great skills you learned in an introductory workshop may not be the thing you start out doing when you're working with someone. You may meet them first and get to know them a little bit, focus then on one specific target behavior, and then begin that process of evoking and trying to resolve ambivalence. Many years ago, I was just beginning to learn motivational interviewing, and I sent recordings of myself to a coach to give me some feedback. And although it's pretty standard to send maybe 3 or 4 recordings to a coach for feedback, back then I was perhaps overly eager and I sent about 150 recordings of myself to a coach. And I have to admit that about a third of those recordings were sent back to me with a message that said something like this: Kate, these were really nice. It was nice to hear you working with this person. You have a lovely conversation style and you are warm and welcoming and help people feel comfortable. But these recordings do not reflect motivational interviewing. And I found myself shocked. I couldn't believe it. I was engaging. I was being what I thought was helpful to people. I was showing kindness and warmth. What was wrong? And I came to find out that I had been recording myself in the engaging process and the focusing process, and then I would send those recordings in for feedback. I wasn't doing anything wrong. I was doing kind of the pre-work to evoking. However, I didn't record myself on some of those recordings in that evoking process, which means I sent recordings of myself doing the stuff you do before motivational interviewing begins. Motivational interviewing begins with evoking. Think of engaging and focusing as like preheating the oven so that you can, in the evoking process, put the item in the oven and actually start baking. That's where the work's to be done, but some preheating has to be done first. Potentially, you will be working with someone and get the sense that they may be ready to move into planning. Now, you notice in this diagram that planning is in yellow. Yellow typically conveys caution, slow down, yield, watch out, something like that. And I love that planning is in yellow because it is important to slow down and enter into planning rather cautiously. Plans can be really helpful for people who are ready to have plans. And similarly, they can be awfully overwhelming and off-putting to people who were not ready to have plans in the first place. So I encourage folks who are trying to move through the 4 processes with a client or a participant or a patient to be really thoughtful about entering into that planning process and do it slowly and thoughtfully and with the consideration that you might actually need to take a step back and sit more in the evoking process. There have been times in my work where I kind of have the sense that maybe I was working with someone who was ready to make a plan and I tiptoed into that process and then quickly realized I'm losing this person. They are shutting down on me. They're giving me 1 and 2 word answers. They're looking at their watch, checking for the door, and I will say out loud to that person, you know what? I think maybe I moved a little too quickly into setting up plans. What do you say we take a few steps back? And sometimes I kind of dramatically push a whole plan aside just so they know I'm willing to really put that off if that's what would be most helpful for them. And so here, if you are able to make a plan with someone, you would be using the spirit and the skills of MI to set up some steps for moving forward. But what you notice here in all 4 processes is that you're still using the spirit of motivational interviewing and you're still using those skills of motivational interviewing, but you're doing them with different goals in mind. Initially, it's just to build a relationship. Then it's to try to determine a target behavior. And then it is to evoke change talk to resolve ambivalence. And then we try to make a plan. Now, I know I made that sound very step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. This, again, is meant to be held very loosely. You might find that you're stepping in and out of these processes, and none of them really have an end point. This is a rather fluid model on purpose. And one thing that I think must be reiterated one more time is that the evoking process is really the part that feels most unique to motivational interviewing. In many other fields, many other styles of working with people, of course, there's engaging and focusing and planning. The evoking part is really what makes motivational interviewing sound distinct and like its own kind of thing. And so that's the part that often people are learning first, and then we add in, by the way, there's some stuff you might want to be doing first before you jump into just evoke, evoke, evoke. I certainly hope this was helpful for you organizing the information that you've already learned. All of those terms that I rattled off at the beginning kind of fit into this model. It's just a matter of knowing when to pick up a particular skill and when to put one down and try something else as you're moving throughout this model in a loose and rather casual way. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me at kate@watsonwellnesspro.com. I'd be happy to answer your questions there.